He did not think he was making a mistake. He was 38, charming, the kind of man who held doors open and remembered your coffee order. He was my supervisor at the architectural firm where I worked as a junior project manager. Everyone liked him. I liked him too for a while. His name is not important anymore. I will call him my supervisor, because that is what he was. And that is exactly why what happened next was so much more complicated than a simple breakup. We dated for 7 months. Quietly, carefully. The way people do when one of them signs the other's performance reviews. I was 29. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room, right up until the moment he needed you to disappear. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in March. I sat in the single-stall bathroom on the 4th floor of our office building for 11 minutes after the test showed 2 lines. I counted. I remember the hum of the ventilation system. I remember thinking that the grout between the floor tiles needed cleaning. Your brain finds the strangest things to focus on when the ground shifts under your feet. I was not panicking. I want to be clear about that. I was calculating. I had watched enough women in that office get quietly sidelined after maternity leave, passed over for the Hendrix project, moved to the less visible accounts. I knew the unspoken rules. And now I was sitting in a bathroom stall holding a plastic test strip, realizing that I was about to become a case study in all of them. I texted him that evening. Simple, factual. We need to talk tonight if possible. He came over. He brought wine, which in retrospect told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking the situation. I told him before he could pour a glass. He set the bottle down on my kitchen counter very slowly. He did not say anything for almost a full minute. Then he said, "Are you sure?" I told him I was sure. He said, "Okay." And then he said, "I need a few days to think." I told him to take whatever time he needed. He kissed me on the forehead the way you kiss someone you are already beginning to say goodbye to. He left the wine on the counter. He did not take it with him, but he did not offer to stay either. 3 days passed, then 4. I went to work. I sat in our Monday morning briefing and watched him present the Q2 projections without once making eye contact with me. I took notes. I asked a question about the timeline on the Ridgefield account. He answered it professionally. Afterward, in the hallway, he touched my arm and said he would reach out soon. Soon turned out to be the following Saturday. He did not come alone. I opened my apartment door expecting him. What I got was him and a man I did not recognize and a woman I would later learn was his older sister. The man, as it turned out, was a family attorney. His name was Gerald. He had a leather portfolio and the practiced calm of someone who had delivered uncomfortable news many times before and considered it simply a function of his profession. My supervisor, the man I had spent 7 months with, the man who knew I took my coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar, the man who had once driven 40 minutes out of his way to bring me soup when I had a sinus infection, stood slightly behind Gerald in my own doorway and did not quite meet my eyes. I stepped back and let them in because I did not know what else to do. Gerald placed the portfolio on my kitchen table without being invited to do so. He opened it. He said he was there on behalf of the family and that the family wanted to handle this situation privately and with sensitivity to all parties involved. The family. I remember looking at my supervisor when Gerald said that and thinking, when did you become the family and I become all parties involved? Gerald slid a document across the table. He gave me a moment to look at it. The number at the top was 800000. He explained that this was a one-time settlement structured as a personal grant with a non-disclosure component designed to allow me to relocate, take time for myself, and make whatever personal decisions I felt were appropriate. Personal decisions. I looked at the document. I looked at Gerald. I looked at my supervisor, who was now studying the middle distance somewhere above my left shoulder. I said, "Are you asking me to terminate the pregnancy?" Gerald said the family was not in a position to make that request directly, but that the settlement was contingent on a mutual resolution of the matter. His sister, who had not spoken yet, said very quietly, "We're trying to be fair." I closed the portfolio. I pushed it back across the table. I said, "I need you all to leave my apartment now." Gerald started to say something about the offer having a time-sensitive window. I stood up. I said it again. My supervisor finally looked at me then, and I saw something on his face that I could not name at the time. I have thought about it since. I think it was relief. Relief that I was the one being difficult. That I was the one asking them to leave. That the story he would tell himself later could start from this moment and not from the moment he walked in with a lawyer instead of a conversation. They left. I closed the door. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The portfolio was gone, but I could still see the outline of where it had been on the table. Then I did something that surprised even me. I did not cry. I did not call my best friend. I did not open a bottle of anything. I opened my laptop and I started researching employment attorneys in the state of Illinois. Because here is the thing Gerald and the family had miscalculated. I was not just a woman they needed to make go away. I was an employee. And my supervisor was not just a man who did not want to be a father. He was my direct manager at a firm with 340 employees and a very clear harassment and discrimination policy in their employee handbook. A handbook I had read carefully when I was onboarded because I am the kind of person who reads handbooks. I called an employment attorney named Patricia on Monday morning. I told her the situation in 17 minutes. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Did they put the number in writing?" I said they had. She said, "Do not touch that document. Do not respond to them at all. Come into my office Wednesday at 2 o'clock. I went in on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Patricia had a corner office with a fern that looked like it had been there longer than the building. She had read everything. I sent her the texts, the email chain from when my supervisor and I first started seeing each other, the meeting notes, the performance review he had given me 4 months into our relationship. She had a yellow legal pad with questions written in blue ink. She said, "I want to talk about a few things. First, the offer. $800,000 with an NDA and a contingency on pregnancy outcome is, in my professional opinion, an attempt to coerce a reproductive decision. That is legally significant in Illinois. Second, your employment situation." She asked me to walk her through my role, my reporting structure, and the timeline of our relationship relative to any promotions, assignments, or reviews. I walked her through it. It took a while. As I talked, she wrote. When I finished, she set down her pen and said, "You've been assigned to 2 major accounts in the last year, both of which went through your supervisor. You received an above-average performance review written and submitted by the man you were in a relationship with, without any disclosure to HR. That is a compliance failure on the firm's part, regardless of intent." She said there were 2 directions we could go. The first was to respond to the family's offer through counsel and negotiate a significantly higher settlement with different terms, no reproductive contingency. The second was to file a complaint with the EEOC and pursue a civil claim against the firm for failure to manage the conflict of interest created by the undisclosed relationship. She asked me what outcome I wanted. I sat with that question for a moment. I thought about the woman Gerald had brought with him. We're trying to be fair. I thought about my supervisor's face in my doorway. I thought about the Ridgefield account and the women who had been quietly moved off the good projects after their maternity leave. Then I said, I want to keep my job, and I want to have this baby, and I want the firm to understand that what happened in that apartment on Saturday was not acceptable. Patricia nodded like she had been expecting that answer. She said, "Then we file with the EEOC, and we send a letter to the firm's general counsel today." I said, "Today?" She said, "They sent a lawyer to your apartment on a Saturday. We send a letter on a Monday. That is how this works." I signed the representation agreement before I left her office. By the time I got home, Patricia had already drafted the letter and sent it. What happened next took about 6 days to fully unfold, and I was not present for most of it. I was at work doing my job, sitting in meetings, answering emails. My supervisor was suddenly in a great many closed-door meetings with people from HR and the firm's legal team. I noticed. I kept my expression neutral and my work output exactly where it had always been. On the 6th day, I was called into a meeting with the firm's HR director and their outside employment counsel. I brought Patricia. She had the Fern office, but she also had a very good litigation record. And I think the outside counsel recognized her name when she walked in, because there was a brief pause in the room that felt like recalibration. The firm's position, as their counsel explained it, was that they had been unaware of the relationship, that they took compliance matters seriously, and that they were prepared to discuss remedies. Patricia said, "Let's start with what remedies are not on the table. My client is not resigning. My client is not transferring to another office as a condition of settlement, and any discussion of the personal offer made to my client at her private residence on Saturday, March 14th, will be documented and included in our EEOC filing." The outside counsel wrote something down. Then he said they would need time to consult internally. Patricia said, "Of course, we'll be in touch." We stood up. We left. In the elevator going down, I said to Patricia, "Is it always like that?" She said, "The good ones are." It took 3 more weeks. There were 2 more meetings, a lot of emails I was not copied on, and 1 phone call from my supervisor that I did not answer and that Patricia responded to on my behalf the following morning. In the end, the firm did several things. They formally restructured my reporting line so that I no longer reported to my supervisor. They brought in an external HR consultant to review their conflict of interest disclosure policy, and they offered a settlement that included a significant sum. I cannot share the specific number under the terms of the agreement, an agreement that had absolutely no contingency attached to any personal decision of mine whatsoever. The NDA in that agreement covered the settlement terms. It did not cover the existence of what had happened. Patricia made sure of that. My supervisor left the firm voluntarily about 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized. I heard through a colleague that he had joined a smaller practice on the north side. I do not know if that is true. I stopped tracking it. My daughter was born in November. I was back at work by February, reassigned to a project lead role on a new account that had nothing to do with my former supervisor's portfolio. My new direct manager is a woman named Sandra who has 2 kids of her own and who, on my first day back, put a company-branded insulated bag on my desk and said, "For pumping. There is a private room on the 3rd floor. Key is in the top drawer. Nobody schedules anything in there before 10. I think about that moment sometimes when people ask me if it was worth it. Worth it is the wrong frame. I did not go through what I went through because I calculated that it would be worth it in some cost-benefit equation. I did it because an attorney and a sister and a man who knew how I took my coffee walked into my apartment with a number and a document, and something in me went very still and very clear. 800,000 sounds like a large number, and I suppose it is. But it had a condition attached to it that no number is large enough to meet. And the moment I understood that, the moment I really understood it, sitting at my kitchen table looking at Gerald's leather portfolio, I also understood that the only response I had available to me was not an emotional one, it was a procedural one. That is what they did not expect. I think they expected grief or fear or desperation or maybe anger they could characterize as instability. They brought a lawyer to my apartment because they had done the calculation that most women in my position do not have access to one. They were wrong about that. My daughter is 16 months old now. She has her father's jawline, which I find mildly irritating and also completely irrelevant to who she is and who she is going to be. She is curious and loud, and she has recently become very interested in pulling everything out of low cabinets, which means my kitchen is in a constant state of reorganization. She does not know this story yet. She will someday, in whatever version of it makes sense for her age and her questions. What I will tell her when she asks, and she will ask, because she is already the kind of person who wants to understand how things work, is that the most powerful thing I did was not refuse the money. It was knowing which door to walk through instead. The one with Patricia's name on it. There is a lesson in that, though not the one people usually want. People like clean stories. They like stories where the bad man is punished, the brave woman wins, and justice arrives in a form that feels dramatic and complete. Real life is rarely that tidy. What happened instead was paperwork, policy, meetings behind closed doors, counsel speaking in measured voices, reporting lines redrawn, language tightened, liability assessed, a man leaving quietly, a woman staying, a child being born, a room on the 3rd floor with a key in the top drawer. That was the shape of it, not thunder, not spectacle, procedure. And maybe that is why it mattered. Because the truth is, power often assumes it will be challenged emotionally, if it is challenged at all. It expects tears, it expects panic, it expects shame, it expects silence most of all. What it does not always expect is someone who reads the handbook, someone who keeps the document, someone who calls the attorney on Monday morning, someone who understands that when a line has been crossed, the next step is not to beg, or bargain, or break down. The next step is to document, then to proceed. I still remember the outline of that portfolio on my kitchen table. I still remember the tone Gerald used when he said the family wanted to handle things privately and with sensitivity to all parties involved. I still remember the way my supervisor stood just behind him, as if distance could turn him into an observer of his own choices rather than the author of them. Those details stay with you, but so do other details. Patricia's blue ink on the yellow legal pad. The pause in the conference room when outside counsel recognized her name. Sandra setting that insulated bag on my desk, without making a speech out of it. The ordinary, practical gestures that make room for a person to remain standing. That is the part I carry forward. Not the offer. Not the number. Not even the betrayal, if I can help it. What I carry forward is the clarity. The understanding that there are moments when your life divides cleanly into before and after, and the division is not made by the harm itself. It is made by the door you choose next. So no, the most powerful thing I did was not refuse 800,000. It was understanding that some offers are not really offers at all. And once I understood that, I knew exactly where to go. If this story stayed with you, stay with us. Subscribe now, leave your thoughts below, and tell us what choice mattered most to you in this story.